Hey guys, tonight we're going to meet someone who's had a pretty bad PR problem for the last couple thousand years. Her name is Medusa, and no, she's not lunging at you with fangs bared. In fact, right now she's sipping something herbal in a surprisingly cozy cave on a coastal cliff, hair curling wildly in the sea breeze, not a snake in sight. Yet, you, of course, are just visiting. But your timing is impeccable. You're about to watch a quiet myth crack open, like a centuries-old egg left in a sunny temple. And yes, it's a little sulfurous. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment, too. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing your sleepy corners of the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of a worn marble path. Somewhere inland, a temple looms, one of Athena's, judging by the owls carved into everything. But your attention drifts toward a reflection, not in the water, but in a chipped bronze mirror, hanging from a crooked tree branch. In the glass, a face looks back at you. It's not monstrous, it's tired, it's curious, it's human. Medusa blinks once, then twice. She frowns at the mirror. Still no snakes, she mutters. That's the thing they never told you. Medusa wasn't born with venom and stone-stare eyes. Once upon a time, she was a mortal priestess, serving a goddess with a complicated personality and very clear boundaries. Now, Medusa's early mornings are filled with sweeping temple steps, arranging olives in symmetrical rows, and wondering whether pigeons feel guilt. She's the only mortal among Athena's priestesses, which makes her the object of a certain kind of fascination. And by fascination you mean backhanded compliments and the occasional spoiled grape hurled in her direction. Still, she carries herself with a quiet kind of dignity, the kind that doesn't come from status or divine lineage, but from waking up at dawn every day to light incense and hum ancient prayers you only halfway understand. The myths often skip over this part, her humanity, her routine, her terrible posture after hours of polishing statues of Athene's favorite owl, her distinct lack of drama. You watch her from the shadow of a column. She stretches her arms skyward, yawns, then trips over a basket of figs. Every time, she mutters. Some ancient sources say Medusa's beauty was so intense it rivaled the gods. Others say that's poetic exaggeration, that really it was her sharp wit and a mole near her left eyebrow that gave her a sort of offbeat charm. Historians still debate whether she was truly celebrated for her looks or just the victim of some overwrought storytelling by bards looking to spice things up for aristocrats bored of chariot races. And here's a curiosity for you. Some of the earliest depictions of Medusa don't show her as a woman at all, but as a wild, tusked creature with a lolling tongue and glaring eyes. Hardly glam. She wasn't meant to be pretty, she was meant to scare. But that's a different era. The version you're with now is something in between. At dusk, she sneaks out to the cliffs, where the wind tangles her hair into knots and seagulls scream like they're late for a toga party. She doesn't do much, just sits and stares at the sea. Not in a dramatic way, more in a what even is salt kind of way. The temple bell rings behind her. Time to return. Time to pretend. Time to be reverent and quiet and soft-eyed for Athena, who really doesn't care for jokes, especially not about sandals. And that's where you stay for now, following this quiet mortal who has no idea what's coming. There's no curse yet, no snakes, no statue garden of former suitors and misguided adventurers. Just Medusa, a girl with tired feet, too many chores, and a whisper of something restless behind her eyes. Medusa wakes before the sun again. You follow her quietly through the half-lit temple halls, where the stone floor feels damp and the scent of last night's incense still clings to the air like a forgotten chant. Her sandals slap softly with each step, a sound so familiar to her that it's almost comforting, like the creak of an old friend's voice. This morning she's been assigned the inner sanctum. It's an honor, technically, but really it just means cleaning Athena's gold-plated spear and pretending you don't notice the cobwebs under the goddess's left sandal. Medusa mutters something under her breath about divine dust bunnies and sets to work. You glance at the statue towering above her. Athena's expression is as serene and terrifying as ever. One hand clutches a shield, the other a thunderous gaze that could probably turn bread into toast. You can't help but feel like the marble eyes are watching, judging, even. But Medusa doesn't flinch. She never does, not even when the other priestesses whisper about her behind the columns. They say she's too bold. She laughs too loudly. She caught Poseidon's attention, you know. Then, in the reflection of a freshly cleaned basin, a voice in the wind, Medusa. You imagine she rolls her eyes the first time she hears it. Classic divine behavior, grandiose, inconvenient, and always with a vague threat of disaster. By now you've noticed how Medusa carries her beauty, like a heavy vase, delicate, polished, and at risk of shattering if she walks too quickly. Not that she asked for it. It just happened. Like a storm that forms on an otherwise sunny day. Here's your historical tidbit. Temples dedicated to Athena were considered places of chastity and sacred silence. Mortal women serving within them were expected to be pure, which in ancient Greek terms meant untouched by men, and barely allowed opinions. Doesn't care much for temple protocols. Gods rarely do. One afternoon, Medusa finds him lounging on the steps, looking smug and radiant like someone who's never had to apologize. She tells him to leave. He doesn't. Now, here's where stories start to bend and fray. Some versions say she willingly entered the temple that day with Poseidon. Others whisper of force, of divine violation cloaked in metaphor and marble. Historians still argue about whether the myth implies consent or an act of power. But in this version, the one where you're walking right beside her, it's clear. She said no. And the gods, well, they weren't listening. You don't see what happens in the temple. You hear the silence afterward, the way the wind stops. The birds scatter. The water in the basin trembles slightly, like it knows something went wrong. Medusa stumbles out, her face pale, her hands shaking. She tries to speak, but the words tangle. Behind her, the statue of Athena now bears a new crack down its chest, right over the heart. And then Athena appears. Not in a blaze of thunder or a blinding light. Just there suddenly. Solid. Furious. A fury colder than Poseidon's waves. She surveys the scene, the quiet devastation, the ruined sanctity of her temple. And she turns not on Poseidon, who's long gone in a shimmer of sea foam, but on Medusa. Here comes the cruelty dressed as divine logic. You've desecrated my temple. Silence. And then the curse. It's not a bolt of lightning or a dramatic transformation. It's slow, horribly slow. You feel it before you see it, her hair twitching unnaturally, a tingling at the back of her neck, a shift in the air. Her reflection in the temple mirror begins to blur, then split, then squirm. The first snake hisses softly. It's small, almost cute, like a baby with a hissy fit. Then another, and another. Her scalp writhes, alive and chaotic. You hear her breath catch. Her skin begins to shimmer, not with beauty, but with something unnatural, cold and polished, like a stone bench at midnight. She runs. The other priestesses scream. One turns to marble on the spot. And suddenly the myth is born not with a roar, but a gasp. Your odd detail of the night? In one obscure version of the myth, Medusa flees not to the edges of the world, but into the folds of a living forest where trees bend to shield her, and animals never look her in the eye. There's no justice, no apology. Just a girl transformed into a monster for surviving a god. You follow her down a hidden trail, away from temples, away from whispers, away from everything that once felt safe. The snakes are restless tonight, but Medusa doesn't cry. She just walks barefoot now into the dusk, where the stars don't judge and the shadows offer something the gods never did, silence without shame. You're not exactly sure how long you've been walking through the wilderness with her now. Time feels different out here, slower, heavier. The trees don't just stand still. They lean in, like they're listening. Even the wind seems more thoughtful. Medusa doesn't speak, and neither do you. There's something sacred about the quiet. Sacred and also a little sad. Eventually she finds it. A cave tucked into a hillside, draped in ivy like nature's version of privacy curtains. It smells like damp earth and wild thyme. This will be her new home, or at least her next hiding place. She steps inside without hesitation, her sandals muddy and her cloak torn at the hem. You follow her in, watching as the last glint of sunlight disappears behind a curtain of moss. The snakes on her head are restless. One hisses at a beetle, another coils up and naps. They're not particularly obedient, but they're hers now. They twitch and stretch like cats waking from a dream. You wonder if they feel what she feels. Probably. Nothing about this curse seems random. She collapses onto the cool stone floor and exhales so deeply it's like she's letting go of an entire life. Which, to be fair, she is. That night the stars peek through the cracks in the cave roof, and you both just lie there staring. Somewhere an owl calls out. Somewhere further, someone's telling a completely different version of this story, where Medusa is already a villain. That version is gaining traction. You want a historical nugget? Ancient myths evolved mostly through oral tradition, which meant facts were more suggestions than standards. By the time a tale reached the next village, a hero could be a villain, a victim, a monster, and a god completely off the hook. And yet the bones of the story remained. Medusa, once beautiful, now cursed. Her gaze deadly, her isolation inevitable. She spends her days exploring the cliffs nearby. The rocks here are jagged and volcanic, like the world had a tantrum once and never cleaned up the mess. It's the kind of terrain no one travels unless they're either very brave or very lost, which honestly describes most of the people Medusa will encounter from here on out. She learns to survive quickly. The snakes prove useful. They rattle when danger's close, warn her when footsteps crunch nearby. Once a wild boar stumbles into the cave. It locks eyes with her for half a second, and well, you know how this works now. Statue. Right there by the entrance. Like an accidental lawn ornament. At first, she's horrified, then mildly disturbed. Eventually, she uses it to hang her cloak. And here's your eccentric fact for the evening. In some older versions of the myth, Medusa didn't just petrify people. She also preserved flowers. Entire fields of blooming marble poppies caught mid-sway. Beautiful, tragic, oddly decorative. The cave fills with stone. Not intentionally, just gradually. A traveler who got too curious, a hunter too bold. A poet who thought tragedy made him immune. She starts leaving warnings outside. Don't look at me. Don't enter. Seriously turn around. They don't work. People rarely listen to warnings, especially when they think they're the main character. At night, she talks to the statues. Just a few words, whispered like apologies. They don't respond. Of course they don't, but the silence feels less empty when it's shared. One evening she sees her reflection in a pool of water near the cliff's edge. She flinches instinctively, more out of habit than fear, but nothing happens. The snakes flick their tongues. She kneels beside it, studying the face that's no longer quite hers. Not just the serpent's. There's something else, a hardness around the eyes, a quiet grief curled in the corners of her mouth. She reaches out, touches the water, and it ripples, distorting her face into something monstrous. Or maybe just misunderstood. Historians still argue about whether Medusa was always meant to symbolize female rage, or if she was just a cautionary tale about what happens when women get too noticeable. You think maybe it's both. Maybe neither. Maybe myths don't owe us clarity. Days blur into nights. The cave becomes her world. She paints symbols on the walls with berry juice and charcoal. They're not spells, not really. Just memories in picture form. A snake curled like a question mark. A temple with broken steps. A face she doesn't want to remember. You notice something else changing. She hums sometimes, quietly, like the melody of a lullaby she half remembers. The snakes seem to like it. They sway gently when she does. The cave hums with her, low and warm. And then one day she laughs. Not a wild laugh. Not bitter. Just one short, startled breath of air that escapes when a squirrel slips and falls into a bush. You both watch it scramble up again, more embarrassed than injured. Medusa covers her mouth in shock, but the smile lingers. A sliver of light in all the dark. She doesn't smile often. But when she does, the entire cave seems to exhale. Outside, the world keeps telling her story without her. In distant cities, artists sculpt her face with exaggerated fangs. Priests warn of her deadly gaze. Philosophers turn her into a symbol of desire, of fear, of womanhood gone wild. No one thinks to ask how she feels about it. But here, in this cave, she's just surviving, breathing, waiting. Not for rescue, she knows better, but for peace. Or at least a moment that doesn't feel like punishment. You lie beside her again that night, staring up at the stars. They haven't changed, Still cold, still distant, still beautiful. Medusa points at one with a finger made steady by practice. That one, she whispers. That one I'd like to turn to stone. But the snakes flick gently toward the sky in agreement. You wake to the scent of ocean spray. Salt hangs in the air like an old rumor one that never quite leaves the conversation. Medusa is already outside, her silhouette etched against the sunrise. She doesn't notice you at first. Her gaze is fixed on the horizon, where the water meets the sky like two old friends pretending not to hate each other. She's different in the mornings. Quieter, sure, but also softer. The snakes stretch lazily, basking in the sun's warmth. One of them yawns, if that's even possible, and curls itself into a spiral nap on her shoulder. For a moment, everything looks normal. Peaceful, even. You'd almost forget she could reduce a grown man to a stone bust with a single glance. Almost. You sit beside her on the ledge, legs dangling over the edge. Far below, waves crash against the rocks like an applause from an audience you'll never see. She doesn't say anything for a long time. You don't either. That's part of the rhythm now, this quiet synchrony between two people who've seen too much and said too little. Then, finally, do you think they'll ever stop coming? Vines choke its columns, but you can still see the faded images carved into the stone gods with unblinking eyes, their hands raised in ambiguous blessing or judgment. It's hard to tell with gods. They weren't known for their emotional clarity. Medusa pokes around the ruins with the hesitance of someone exploring an old diary one that doesn't belong to her anymore. There's a stone basin, cracked but still catching rainwater. She wipes away a layer of moss and stares at her reflection again. Used to be I couldn't pass a mirror without checking if my hair looked all right, she says. Now I check to see if I still look like myself, whatever that means. She finds an old lyre buried beneath a collapsed column. The strings are gone, but she holds it like it remembers music. That night she hums again, this time to the rhythm of invisible strings. The melody is slow, mournful, but it carries. The kind of tune that belongs to shipwrecks and lost cities. And then you guessed it, another visitor. You hear the clinking armor before you see him. A would-be hero. Bronze-plated bravado, sword gleaming, hair tousled, just enough to suggest he's both handsome and humble. Classic. Medusa tenses. The snakes hiss like tea kettles left too long on the stove. You duck behind a rock. Old instincts, maybe. You're not part of this. You never are. The man announces himself, loudly. Something about justice, glory, blah, blah, blah. Honestly, you tune him out. He's quoting from some script he's memorized, the kind where he always wins and the monster always dies. Never mind that he has no idea what she even did. She doesn't move, doesn't reply, just stands there perfectly still. The hero steps closer, shield raised, eyes carefully averted. He tries to talk to her, which is new. Most of them skip that part, but his words stumble too rehearsed, too detached. It's obvious he doesn't see her. Not really. She sighs, quiet, but final. Then he looks, one heartbeat, maybe two, and then stone. You'd feel bad for him if he hadn't strutted in like a man who thought the world owed him a statue anyway. Now he's got one. She doesn't gloat, doesn't even blink, just walks past him, back to the cave. The snakes settle like they're used to this. You follow because what else can you do? That night, she doesn't hum. You sit beside her by the fire. The flames crackle politely. Outside, the wind picks up. You think about all the versions of this moment that will be told, the one where she lured a hero to his doom, the one where she laughed while he turned to stone, the one where she was already evil, so it didn't matter. People always want to believe I was born a monster, she says, her voice flat. It makes the ending easier. The truth is probably lost somewhere under all the marble. She pokes at the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the air like fireflies escaping a jar. You know, she adds, there was a time when I thought the gods might change their minds. Can you believe that? She places the broken lyre by the cave entrance beside the new statue. A small act of spiteful hospitality. You both sleep early that night. The stars blink silently above, as if to say no comment. The next morning, the wind smells like wet earth. It's rained overnight just enough to make the stone steps slick and the leaves heavy with droplets. You step out of the cave and almost slip on a snake. It hisses at you like it's offended by your clumsiness. You apologize. It doesn't care. Medusa is already awake, as usual. She's gathered the lyre again, balanced it carefully on a flat rock, and is restringing it using what looks like thread from her own clothing. Her hands work with slow precision, like she's done this before. You sit beside her, careful not to interrupt. She hums while she works, something low and nostalgic. There's a rhythm to it that sounds like walking through a forest alone, but not being afraid, like you're supposed to be alone, just for a little while. Did you play before? You ask. She nods. When I was younger, before everything shifted, like her life cracked open one day and swallowed her whole. You look at the lyre, then at the broken shrine in the trees, and then at the newest statue, yesterday's hero, frozen mid-step, face stuck in that awkward, this wasn't supposed to happen expression. You ever think about reversing it? You ask the curse. The sound is thin, wobbly, but it hangs in the air like a question no one wants to answer. You spend the morning hiking with her to a ridge you didn't know existed. From up here, you can see the coastline stretching into the distance, like a cracked piece of pottery. The sea is endless, its surface shivering with reflected light. Far out, a ship sails by, small as a toy. It doesn't stop. I used to wonder if I could swim far enough to reach a new story, she says. But I never made it past the breakers. Travelers would offer sacrifices before journeys, oil, honey, sometimes small animals, in exchange for smooth sailing. Some myths say the gods took these offerings seriously. Others suggest they just liked free snacks. You sit on a flat rock and eat a fig Medusa packed in a cloth pouch. It's sweet, a little gritty with seeds, and probably stolen from some long-abandoned orchard. She eats hers slower, like it might be her last. Did you know, she says between bites, that figs were considered sacred to Dionysus? As the day stretches thin, the wind shifts again. A storm's brewing out at sea. Thick clouds stalk the horizon, bloated and brooding. You gather driftwood for the fire, your fingers stiff from the cold. She builds the fire like a ritual, layering the twigs, coaxing the flames to life with calm determination. You watch her, thinking she'd make a good survivalist YouTuber. How to build a fire when your gaze turns everyone into granite. The snakes curl into themselves, sleepy but alert. You wrap your arms around your knees. waiting for the part of the evening where something always shifts. Sure enough, there's a sound. Not footsteps, not clinking armor. Singing, you both freeze. It's faint but clear. A woman's voice somewhere beyond the cliffs. High, trembling, almost too perfect to be real. Medusa frowns. Sirens. Their voices weren't just songs, they were memories, desires, regrets. Anything you'd forgotten you missed, you listen again. The melody swells, impossibly close. You swear it's calling your name. Don't follow it, she says sharply. No matter what it promises. Sleep, she says. They usually go away by dawn. The voice wraps around those memories and makes them sharp again. But you don't move. You stay still like a statue, ironically, and eventually the voice fades. Historians still argue whether sirens were birds, mermaids, or metaphors, Medusa murmurs. But it doesn't matter, they sing what you want to hear. That's enough to kill most people. You finally sleep. The rain keeps a steady rhythm through the night, like an old clock ticking in another room. By the time the sun limps over the horizon, your body aches from the stiffness of sleep and the damp air. You stretch, bones cracking, and glance at Medusa. She's already awake, perched like a gargoyle at the cave's edge, eyes on the horizon. You didn't sleep, you say? Though it's not a question. She shrugs. Didn't want to dream. Like someone's following. You'd make a joke about paranoia, but even the snakes look jumpy. I think someone's here, she finally says. Not just a hero this time. Something else. The hike is slow, the rocks slippery, and every shadow looks like a threat. Medusa moves with purpose, scanning the trees, tracing symbols into the dirt as she walks. You realize she's casting protective wards, using shapes from old temple floors and crypt walls. There's your historical nugget. In ancient times, it wasn't uncommon to carve apotropaic symbols, things meant to ward off evil, into the thresholds of homes and temples. Eyes, spirals, mirrored letters. Anything to confuse or frighten away spirits, monsters, or nosy neighbors. Medusa stops near a cluster of boulders and crouches. Her fingers brush the moss aside, revealing what looks like an old footprint. Not recent, but definitely humanoid. Maybe even barefoot. You raise an eyebrow. Friend of yours? Split down the middle like it was struck by lightning, but there's no scorch mark. Just blackness. Not char, not ash. Actual black, like a hole punched through the world. The roots are curled upward, skeletal and exposed, like the tree was trying to walk away. Medusa touches it gently. This is a mark, she says. From Hecate, the one who stands in the places where choices blur. Hecate doesn't visit for fun, she murmurs. She only appears when something is unbalanced, or about to break, absorbing traits from other deities, like Artemis and Persephone, kind of like a magical remix album of the ancient world. You step back, unsure if the ground will swallow you next. Medusa, however, seems resolved. She kneels and carves another symbol into the dirt, whispering something in a language that doesn't sound like any you've heard before. The snakes stir, then settle. She's watching, Medusa says, but not here to help. Good for visions, or bad ones, depending. That's not what you expected, but it makes sense. There's a kind of mercy to her, buried beneath the stone and scars. She's rough but not cruel, guarded but not hollow. I got close once, she adds. A place in Naxos, There were walls and books and food that grew where you planted it. But they came anyway, said I'd violated divine law, that I wasn't supposed to have peace. They left out the part where I begged Athena for help. Or maybe a past life you were a mirror once. Not metal, just reflection, mindful of gods and curses and the things they don't tell you in school. Somewhere beyond the trees, something moves. But for now, you're safe. Tomorrow, the story continues. The morning doesn't arrive with sunlight. It seeps in like fog, slow and indifferent. You wake to the scent of damp earth and bitter herbs, the fire reduced to a warm heap of embers. Medusa isn't in the cave, again. You step outside, stretching the sleep from your bones, and spot her standing ankle-deep in the surf. Her snakes hang like wet ropes, their hissing muffled by the waves. You approach, careful not to startle her. Taking up morning swimming, you sit nearby, toes grazing the edge of the water. It's colder than it should be, like it's remembering winter. Medusa's voice comes over the hush of the waves. You know, they say Poseidon created horses from the sea, that he struck the ground and bam horse. Poseidon was not just god of the sea, but also of earthquakes and horses. The link, some think it's symbolic of wild, unstoppable power like waves, like hooves, like rage. She finally turns, water trailing down her arms. I met him once, she says almost casually. You blink. Poseidon? Smells like brine and pride. Roots that braid into impossible patterns. It smells like rosemary and secrets. Medusa stops at an old pillar half buried, worn with age. You recognize the Doric style, though the inscription has eroded. She runs her fingers along it like a memory. This was once a gate, she whispers, to a sanctuary, one I tried to build after the fall. You try being hunted for 3 centuries and see how often you change address. But with the weight of an old wound that stopped bleeding but never closed. I went to her, she says, after it happened, I thought she'd understand. Wisdom, right? Justice. Instead, and some though fewer insist, it was an act of jealousy. Historians still argue about her motive, you say aloud, testing the thought. Medusa nods. Because mortals are always trying to make sense of immortal cruelty. You're not sure what she's doing, but the forest seems to lean closer when she does it. And then you find the bones. Just a few. Animal, probably. Arranged in a spiral. Not natural. You glance at her. Your work? A crow caws from somewhere too high, and you flinch. Medusa doesn't. She walks the spiral with slow, deliberate steps, lips moving silently. Then she stops and draws a circle in the dirt beside it. From her belt, she pulls a small jar of ochre and begins painting a symbol, a triangle inside a circle, with 3 dots. What does it mean, you ask? It's a lock, she says. To keep what's beneath. And the feeling doesn't fade when you sit by the fire, or when you eat the stale bread Medusa found stashed in a tree hollow. Yes, a tree hollow. Don't ask? But the world doesn't want Medusa. It wants a monster. Like she's not just a story you're walking through, but someone who's starting to let you stay. Outside, the waves return to their rhythm, and somewhere in the forest, something watches, but doesn't move. The morning comes in shades of violet and rust, the sky torn in thin streaks of pre-dawn light. You wake up with your cheek pressed against a patch of moss, and it's a little wet, which, yes, is disgusting. But at this point, your standards are flexible. Medusa is already up again. She's squatting near the edge of the cliff, tossing breadcrumbs to a family of lizards. The snakes on her head seem to be watching too, tiny green eyes blinking in unison. Do you ever sleep? You ask, stretching and regretting all your life choices that led to sleeping on a rock slab. Sleep's overrated, she says. Try existing in people's nightmares for a few hundred years. Makes real sleep feel like a practical joke. Surprising you, I was a priestess, yes, but also a person. I laughed, I gossiped. I had favorite sandals. Medusa wasn't born a monster. She was a mortal priestess in the temple of Athena known for her beauty, and more importantly, her vow of celibacy in service of the goddess. You can tell the memory still aches for her, even the good ones. Maybe especially those. I was dedicated to Athena because I admired her, Medusa continues, her voice quieter now. Not for her beauty, not for her power, but for her solitude. She didn't need to charm or flirt or seduce. She was whole on her own, following a path Medusa insists used to be sacred. It's overgrown now, covered in ivy and tangled roots, but there's a rhythm to the steps like stone once laid with purpose. You find a half-buried altar, carvings nearly worn away, but you can make out the faint symbol of a trident, Poseidon again. She kneels before it, not in reverence but inspection. I came back here once, she says. Years after, I thought maybe there was something left. Here's your odd curiosity of the day. In some coastal regions of ancient Greece, it was customary to toss coins or small items into the sea as offerings to Poseidon to prevent shipwrecks, storms, or worse. The sea, quite literally, was believed to have moods. Medusa stands brushing the dust off her hands. He believed I was a gift, she says, not a person, not even a priestess, just something to be claimed, until you reach a clearing with stone steps that lead down into the earth. At first glance it looks like a collapsed cistern, but Medusa knows otherwise. This was mine, she says. After, the chamber is small, circular, lined with carvings, snakes, owls, stars, and eyes. At the center is a pool, still and black like glass. I carved these myself, she says. Every time I needed to remember who I was before. It doesn't show what's outside, she says, only what's carried in. Like whatever she's leading you to has waited long enough. She brings you to a hill, a place with jagged stones arranged in a broken circle. Not naturally, deliberately. They tried to kill me here, she says, a long time ago. Not heroes, villagers. They said my gaze turned it to stone, she explains, almost bored. I told them it ate something poisonous. They didn't care. As night falls, you sit beside the ancient fire ring, watching her light it with flint and dried moss. The snakes are quiet. Her eyes reflect the flames, and for the first time, you realize they're not gold, they're green, like seagrass and broken glass. You keep asking about the curse, she says, but the truth is, I didn't become a monster the day I was cursed. When did you? Letting the trees sway above you like the slow rocking of a cradle. The path you follow now curves through ancient terrain, thick with gnarled roots and half-buried. Stones that look suspiciously like they might have once been human. But you don't ask. Eventually she stops at a small plateau overlooking a wide valley. Below, the ruins of a village rest in quiet decay. Crumbled walls, roofless homes, a central well now clogged with weeds and bones of some forgotten animal. It's peaceful in the way only abandoned places can be, like time sighed and walked away. That was Ligro's, Medusa says. They gave me bread once, and then they gave me chains. Why? The Gorgon became a scapegoat not only for gods, but for mortals as well. Communities facing unexplained events, plagues, animal deaths, bad harvests, sometimes blamed Gorgon spirits or evil eyes. It was both superstition and social control. Medusa crouches near a cracked wall where moss has claimed what might have once been a mural. She runs her fingers over it. They made me into a warning, she says. Girls were told not to be too loud, not to be too clever, not to wear red or blue, or perfume, or anything that might make a god notice. I hated what they needed me to be. I hated that fear makes people cruel. But no, I didn't hate them. Vines twist through cracked pillars, and a tree's growing right through the old altar. But the carvings are breathtaking. Dozens of serpents in perfect symmetry coiling, dancing, devouring stars. This was built after the curse, she says, by women, runaways, outcasts. They didn't worship me. They just gathered. It's quiet again as you explore. You touch the cold stone, wondering what it would feel like to carve your fear into a wall and let it stay there. You know, she says softly, I used to imagine this place filled with laughter. They would bring honey cakes and songs and tell each other you're not cursed. You're just different. Sounds like therapy with snacks. You sit in what used to be a corner of the temple, watching the sun flicker through gaps in the stone roof. Medusa sits across from you, arms resting on her knees. There was a girl, she says suddenly, back then. She was the first to stay. She ran away instead. The one that means you care more than you thought you would. You spend the night there, no tent, no fire. Just the stars poking through the broken temple, and Medusa humming a tune so old it feels like stone turning to dust. At some point you whisper, do you ever miss being human? Heavier than anything else. And in the stillness you realize you're not just here to listen. You're here because stories like hers matter. Because curses aren't always about punishment. Sometimes they're just the world's way of saying, you don't belong. Warming the cracked stones and your tired limbs. You stretch, joints popping like popcorn in a microwave, while Medusa stands at the far edge, her silhouette framed by the rising sun. There's a solemnity in her stillness, a reverence. You walk over, rubbing sleep from your eyes. Morning ritual, not the gods. Today's destination, a cave said to echo truths, not metaphorical truths, actual spoken truths. You say a lie in there, it rings hollow, literally. The echo stutters, breaks, betrays you like a snitch. You pass a stream along the way. Medusa kneels, dips her hands into the water, and offers a quiet prayer, not to the gods, but to the naiads. They never betrayed me, she says. They just kept swimming. She tells you about the first time she discovered the cave. I was looking for a place to scream, she says. Somewhere the wind wouldn't carry it back to the world. The air cools, the light fades, and the sound of your steps becomes eerily precise. You speak. Hello? Older, maybe pre-Hellenic, swirls, lines, eyes. The air pulses with the kind of quiet that only exists when something sacred once stood there. This was a place of confession, she says. Not guilt, just unburdening. Before she left, just honest. But others say the curse was so complete, even her thoughts began to change. Historians still debate whether she retained her identity or became something entirely new. Medusa walks to a corner of the chamber where water drips slowly into a small stone basin. She scoops some into her hands and lets it run down her face. Sometimes I come here, she says, just to see if the echo still works. Doesn't stop you. She just nods as if approving of the ritual. Back outside, the skies shifted. Late afternoon sun slices through the forest in amber streaks. The air smells of moss and possibility. Where to next, you ask? Medusa grins. You ever heard of the Oracle of Flies? You glance back at the cave. It seems smaller now, less imposing, but still listening. You wonder what it heard today and what it chose to keep. The forest thickens as you follow Medusa through a winding trail, gnarled branches arching overhead like the ribs of some ancient creature. The light filters through in slices, and the air hums not with bird song, but with the buzzing of insects. Loud, persistent, a sound that makes your skin crawl just a little. So, the Oracle of Flies? You ask, hoping it sounds less horrifying when spoken aloud. Medusa chuckles. Yeah, it's not technically its name. The locals called it that because, well, you'll see, forgotten ones. This particular oracle once lived in a cave system where the walls were coated with a kind of fungus that attracted swarms of flies. But unlike normal flies, these ones were eerily synchronized, responding to questions with patterns and pulses, like divine Morse code. Historians are still divided on whether this was pure myth, mass hallucination, or some freaky symbiotic relationship between the fungus and the flies. But records from traveling priests mention the oracle's accuracy in predicting floods, plagues, even the fall of minor kings. The cave was eventually sealed off, probably because people got tired of decoding insect grammar. You're starting to feel itchy just thinking about it. Tell me, we're not actually going inside a buzzing cave of doom, you mutter. Medusa smirks. Of course we are. What did you expect, Spa Day? I respect fire, she corrects. Big difference. But they're not flying around your face or dive-bombing your ears. They're orderly, static, watching. Don't swat, Medusa warns. They know. Everything here vibrates with layered energy like a radio tuned to 10 stations at once. Medusa stands in the center of the chamber and whispers a question to the darkness. What have I become? Unfinished, she translates. You stare. You've done this before? Medusa studies it. Loss of control, she says. You feel that weird chill in your spine, like you just opened a drawer and found something you weren't ready to see. Cool, you say weakly. Love that for me. It wasn't always about majestic eagles or thundering horses. Sometimes the gods whispered through the mundane. That's how a fly could become an oracle. And that's how fear could become prophecy. The air grows thick with tension, or maybe just heat. Medusa is silent now, staring at the flies like she's waiting for something else. You wait, too. Then suddenly she says, I remember now. She walks toward the exit. Let's go. This place gets chatty if you linger, because what else are you going to do? Return to your regular life where the weirdest thing is an expired yogurt in the fridge? No, thanks. And as the trees close around you again, you wonder what other oracles history forgot, and what truths they still whisper to anyone, brave or weird enough to listen. You keep pace with Medusa as the forest opens into a quiet glade, bathed in soft twilight that makes everything seem just a little unreal, like the kind of place you'd find in a dream or a really good Instagram filter. The air here is cooler, almost sweet, with the scent of wildflowers you can't quite name. It's the kind of silence that presses gently against your ears, the kind that makes every small sound feel amplified, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a night bird, your own breathing. Medusa stops and looks around like she's making sure you're still with her. You probably look like a human who's just survived a swarm of prophetic flies, so that's fair. She points ahead. This is where it gets a little less weird, or maybe just less gross, because I'm starting to think gross and weird are basically synonyms in your world. But instead, the water ripples unnaturally, as if disturbed by something beneath the surface. Fun fact, Medusa says, the ancient Greeks were obsessed with fountains and springs. They believed these places were portals to the divine. Some even thought the water could reveal the future, or cleanse curses. Medusa kneels beside the fountain, dipping her fingers into the cool liquid. They say this one once belonged to a nymph cursed for her pride. The water here holds her sorrow. That's Medusa before the curse, Medusa says softly, watching your reaction. You swallow hard. It's strange, seeing a side of someone or something you thought you knew. Like discovering your grumpy neighbor was once a ballerina. You touch the water, and a sudden chill runs through you. So what exactly was the curse? Not just the power to turn people to stone, but the loneliness, the isolation, the fear. It's like a fragmented movie playing just for you. You realize something. Medusa's curse wasn't just a punishment. It was a story of pain, power, and ultimately survival. You shiver, not from the cold, but from the weight of history settling on your shoulders. Ready to keep going? Medusa asks, standing up. You nod, feeling strangely grateful for the strange, shimmering silence of the enchanted fountain. You follow Medusa as the path winds deeper into the shadows of the forest, where the moonlight barely peeks through the thick canopy. The air feels cooler here, carrying the faint, earthy scent of moss and damp stone. It's peaceful in a way that almost lulls you into a sleepy daze perfect for a story meant to send you off to dreamland. Medusa's voice is softer now, almost conspiratorial. You know, there's a lot more to my story than the snakes and the stone gaze. Like how I was actually worshipped in some places. It's a weird twist, considering I'm usually the villain. A small, proud smile flickering across her face. Yeah, some cults saw me as a protector, a guardian of sacred spaces. In Corinth, they had a temple dedicated to me, where I was called a goddess of sorts. So the ultimate bad girl had her own fan club. Some scholars think they symbolized something else, like power, rebirth, or even female rage. You notice the forest opening onto an ancient ruin, columns cracked and worn by centuries of wind and rain. The stones seem to whisper secrets, stories long forgotten, but somehow still alive. Medusa steps onto the ruins, her voice echoing softly. These stones, they tell stories of how people once sought to honor and fear the unknown. My curse was one way to explain the unexplainable. Was it really Athena's doing? And the stars began to peek through the canopy, winking like ancient eyes watching over your slow, winding journey. Medusa looks up, then back at you. Ready for the last part of the story? You settle in as Medusa begins the final chapters of her tale, her voice a gentle hum against the night's soft chorus of crickets and rustling leaves. The forest seems to breathe alongside her words, each sentence weaving a delicate tapestry between history and myth, fact and fable. After all the stories of my curse and the heroes who came after, there's this quieter truth about what it meant to be Medusa, she says, her tone softer, more reflective. You see, the curse wasn't just about turning people to stone. It was about isolation, being set apart, feared, and misunderstood. A crown of solitude more than menace. People forget that in ancient times myths served as mirrors to society's fears, Medusa continues. In a way, my story became a way to caution people about power, about beauty, about control, but also about empathy, if you look closely. There's something soothing in how the ancient story turns inward, exploring emotions you didn't expect to find in a myth known mostly for its monsters. Here's a little fact you might like, she adds with a sly grin. In some versions, the gaze that petrifies isn't just literal stone turning. It's symbolic a way to say that facing overwhelming fear or trauma can freeze you inside, turning your heart to stone. And the truth is probably somewhere in between. But what about the ones who understood the deeper meaning? The ones who saw the curse as a challenge, not just a monster to slay? Well, that part's a bit open-ended. Some say I became a constellation, others that my story lives on in every tale about misunderstood power. The things we fear most might just be the parts of ourselves waiting to be understood. Medusa's story has settled around you like a familiar quilt, woven with threads of ancient truths and gentle insights. You reflect on how myths like hers aren't just about monsters and heroes, but about the quiet struggles we all face: loneliness, fear, and the search for acceptance. The idea that a curse could also be a metaphor for isolation makes her story feel unexpectedly close, like a whispered secret between old friends. As you let your eyes close just a bit, the images of snakes soften into flowing waves, and the sharpness of stone turns into smooth river rocks warmed by the sun. You imagine the stars above, the same ones that might have witnessed Medusa's fate, twinkling with timeless calmness. You realize that stories like hers are less about the endings and more about the journey, the way they invite you to slow down, breathe, and find peace in the unknown. It's a reminder that even the most tangled myths have gentle hearts beneath their scales and stone. With each breath, your body relaxes further, the rhythm of the night syncing with your own. The world around you feels safe, a quiet sanctuary where you can let go of the day's worries and sink into calm. So as you drift deeper into sleep, carry with you the thought that understanding comes in many forms, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do is simply listen without judgment or hurry. Let this gentle night hold you close, like a soft lullaby whispered by ancient voices, guiding you to a place of rest and renewal. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with soft light and peaceful wonder.